So I want to use this video to talk a bit more about the workflow of my AI game development, what I usually have open on my laptop when I'm doing it and that sort of stuff. So when I'm doing it, and actually when I'm sort of, putting together the AI game development, I've got a few things going on. So first of all, I've got my Trello board up. My Trello board, I pretty much have to basically track what it is that I need to do, but a lot of the times it's very useful to be able to jot down what I have done. Because what I'm finding is that, especially when working on a big project like a game, being able to keep consistency and momentum is really important. And I found that there's a lot of times where I can get very easily discouraged by how long, obviously a project like this can take. So sometimes even things such as, I fixed this small little thing, I adjusted this, I'll jot down in my Trello board for the day. So I might put, the 11th of the 4th, 2026, and then add a little, checklist. I might literally just put all the small little things just because it means I can look at that at the end of the day and go, yeah, okay, we did move forward. So that's one of the big things. You can sometimes use Trello for things, for example, like just putting down ideas and planning out, the upcoming sort of in terms of weeks and stuff. For me, usually I'm using Trello, at least at the moment now, more so just focusing on the stuff that I want to do today, the things that I got done. And then maybe I might jot down a few things in terms of what to do for the next days. But yeah, generally speaking, Trello is really, really good. I think it's just good for that consistency aspect. So really quite happy with that. The second thing I do is I have ChatGPT open. Now, I don't actually have ChatGPT open to use it, but more so to actually speak into it. So I've got a like Chrome extension for ChatGPT where I can click on something and I can speak to my laptop and it will basically type all the stuff in. What I'll then do is I'll then copy that and then I'll put that into Gemini. Just because you can do the same thing for Gemini, you can speak into Gemini, but I find that if you pause for a little too long, it will just auto send your prompt, which is kind of annoying. But that's just that. But yeah, really, I have ChatGPT open just to speak into it, because one of the important things when I am doing AI game development, especially when I'm trying to, brainstorm stuff, give cursor prompts, which I'll speak about in a minute. Being able to just speak things as opposed to having to type things is very nice as being able to be as, I guess, creative and open speaking and thinking as possible. So that's really the second thing. The third thing is that I'll have Gemini open. Now, this Gemini at the moment is basically I'm using it to brainstorm ideas around my game, which I'm working on, which at the moment is Primus. And this basically, this is pretty much where if I don't have a clear idea or a clear prompt in terms of what I want to do, then I'll speak to ChatGPT and I'll take that and I'll put that into Gemini and try and get more clarity. And this is really, really quite good because what I'm finding is it's a lot better, at least for me, to be able to bounce ideas off of AI, be able to brainstorm things, be able to take ideas from it and basically go back and forth. And then once I've got a clear idea, at the moment what's happening with the Gemini I'm using is every response that it gives me, at the end it gives me a prompt which I could then go and copy and paste into Cursor. Half of the time, or a lot of the time, I don't actually do it, but sometimes it is actually quite useful to go, actually, you know what, that's a very good idea, let's just put that straight in. So that's been really useful because, yeah, a lot of it, like the really cool thing with just using a lot of stuff with AI is that you can just brainstorm and get AI to do the difficult things, but you can allow that creativity to come in there and really help. So that's what I really do like. The next thing is I've obviously got Unity open. I don't really need to explain that too much, but at the moment I'm using Unity to obviously build my games. The next thing is then Cursor. So I ramble on about this loads, but Cursor is pretty much, think of it as ChatGPT, but when you give it prompts, it will go away and make scripts, edit scripts, delete scripts if you ask it to. It can even edit and move around assets within Unity. Really quite cool. But that sort of thing. And this is really good. So, for example, most recently, I basically implemented a crowd hype system where, the player and the enemy both have a hype meter, and as they deal damage to opponents, land critical hits, do showboat, abilities, the hype will go up and down. And I basically, described what I wanted to Cursor, put in a massive sort of prompt, right? Copy and paste everything from that ChatGPT into Cursor, and it went away and it implemented all of it. It added all the relevant scripts. The cool thing with Cursor as well is that it does give you a bit of guidance in terms of what to do, like how to implement it. And worst comes to worst, you can always ask Cursor to say, hey, can you make a small file basically just showing or just sharing how I should implement the hype system or whatever it is, and it will go away and make that file. So again, really useful. And even with Cursor as well, because it has all the context you need, because it's got access to all your files, not only can you ask it to do things, but you can also put it in ask mode and simply ask questions or speak about what's in the project, and it won't edit anything. It will just tell you what's currently going on. Now, this was really useful for things like even when I was making Scarred Steel, where I was trying to figure out, well, how much damage is this dealing? What effects is strength having? And all sorts. And it would be able to tell me without me having to, make a guess with things. So that's really quite useful. And what I'm finding is with all of this, you don't need to understand the code, right? And a lot of people might get, a bit annoyed by that because I'm not doing it the traditional way. But you don't need to understand all these complicated bits. What really matters is your ability to use AI to understand what's going on and to give AI the best context it can so it can fulfill the thing you're trying to make. But that's pretty much what I will say. But other than that, that's pretty much it. The only other thing that I will say that I am using is I'm using something called Focus To Do. Now, I've been using this for probably about 3 years now, or at least at least 2 years or 2.5 years. And all this is where I can pretty much track the time when I'm working. So what I'll do is I'll literally, I'll go to game dev, like the game dev category, and I'll start on Primus. The timer will start ticking away. I'll basically hide that tab and I'll work away. I might do, for example, I'll typically ideally aim for at least 90 minutes, sometimes maybe 2 hours in terms of one, deep work session. And then I'll basically stop that timer, basically end that timer. I'll take a break or do whatever, and that's fine. But what I can see is for example, how long I've worked, every day. I can see when I've worked, right? If I look at my analytics, but I can also obviously track the amount of time I've spent on that project actually working on it. Because you hear people say, oh yeah, I worked 10 hours, like today or something like that. But in terms of how much you actually spent sat down at that screen doing it, it's like, well, it's very different. For me, typically, I'm finding I'm spending maybe 3.5 hours to maybe 5 hours a day sat down at a screen, specifically doing the work. But yeah, and that might not sound like a lot, but I guess with the sort of stuff I'm doing, it can get a bit intense. But I think it's been pretty useful, and that's basically how I was able to track how much I spent on Scarred Steel in terms of being sat down actively working on it and what I'll do moving forward. But it's a small little interesting thing. I say that that's very optional. And even when doing that, I try to avoid focusing too much on the time I spent and more so on what I actually did with that time. But that's pretty much what I'll say. But overall, that's pretty much what I'm doing, from a AI workflow. The only other thing I actually will say I have just remembered is I use OBS to record me at the bottom left and then my screen. I'll try to do that as frequent as possible, just because I can then use that footage to then obviously put on the screen when I'm obviously doing my videos, to basically show people or at least give people an idea of what I'm doing, to show people that I am actually doing something. And that's, fairly easy to sort of do and set up. But that's pretty much what I'm doing. The most important things really is obviously Unity, being the thing you're building on, which, I mean, I haven't even tested out some of the other things, but I'm using Unity. Things like Cursor, things like Gemini, ChatGPT, whatever. What really matters is that you've got something to note down the progress you're making, the stuff you're doing, and the thing you want to do. So for me, that's Trello. The second thing is having AI to speak to and to give prompts to and to brainstorm with, which for me, it's speaking to GPT and brainstorming with Gemini. And then it's a matter of obviously being able to effectively use AI to build your game, which for me is Cursor. I'm sure there are other things out there, but Cursor's been good for me. And that's pretty much about it. So that's pretty much what I'm going to say. If you have any questions, obviously do let me know. If you are curious about getting into AI game development, I do have a few, or at least a short video series in my Discord that you can take a watch at. It's pretty much more so about just sort of showing, or a bit of a walkthrough showing sort of how I would start to build my first AI game, or at least if I would start over again. It's less about having a finished product, and it's more about giving you a more clarity in terms of how I specifically use AI, and I pretty much describe my process, what I'm talking about here with that. But that's about it. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you soon.